The Mary Celeste was not found drifting. She was found sailing, with food aboard, cargo below deck, and no living soul at the helm. But buried beneath the familiar ghost ship legend is a stranger claim, that her final voyage crossed paths with a shadowy Victorian network operating across the Atlantic. By the end, you'll know what investigators actually found aboard, why the official inquiry suspected a crime, how an underground world of sailors, merchants, and secret societies became attached to the case, and the most likely reason 10 people vanished without leaving a body behind. December 5, 1872. You're standing on the deck of the Dei Grazia, a merchant brig crossing the Atlantic between the Azores and Portugal. The weather is unsettled, but visibility is good enough to notice another vessel moving strangely in the distance. Its sails are torn. Its course is erratic. It yaws across the wind as though the person steering has forgotten where land is. Captain David Morehouse orders his men closer. They recognize the ship, the Mary Celeste, an American brigantine that left New York 8 days before them. Morehouse knows her captain, Benjamin Briggs. Briggs is experienced, cautious, and deeply religious. He is sailing with his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 crewmen. 10 people in all. Yet no one answers the Dei Grazia signals. A boarding party crosses the water. The men climb onto a wet, deserted deck, and enter one of history's most enduring mysteries. The Mary Celeste is damaged, but seaworthy. Several hatches are open. Water sloshes in the hold, though not enough to sink her. The cargo, more than 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, is mostly intact. Personal belongings remain aboard. There is food for months. The crew's pipes are reportedly left behind. Captain Briggs's cabin contains valuables. But the ship's small boat is gone. So are the people. The last entry in the ship's log was made 10 days earlier, near the Azores. Somehow, after everyone disappeared, the Mary Celeste continued sailing for hundreds of miles, alone. This is where the clean historical record begins to dissolve into Victorian darkness. The 19th century Atlantic was not simply an ocean. It was an underground economy. Sailors carried contraband. Merchants insured cargo for more than it was worth. Salvage crews profited from abandoned vessels. Dockside taverns connected smugglers, informants, recruiters, and thieves from New York to Liverpool, Gibraltar, and the Mediterranean. And woven through that world were private brotherhoods. Freemasons maintained lodges in major ports. Sailors joined fraternal orders and mutual aid societies. Merchants formed invitation-only clubs where reputations, contracts, and information could cross borders faster than official mail. These groups were real. But there is no reliable evidence that one organized the disappearance of the Mary Celeste's crew. The connection emerged because the case looked designed for conspiracy. Captain Morehouse happened to know Briggs. His ship departed New York shortly after the Mary Celeste. He then found an abandoned vessel whose recovery could earn him a valuable salvage award. To a suspicious Victorian mind, coincidence looked like coordination. Rumors spread that Morehouse and Briggs had arranged an insurance fraud. Some suggested the crews met at sea, transferred the missing family and sailors, then staged the abandonment. Others imagined a maritime society capable of moving people through friendly ports under new names. It was a perfect story, except the physical evidence resisted it. Morehouse gained far less salvage money than he could reasonably have expected. Briggs had invested in the Mary Celeste and stood to lose from her destruction. His wife and infant daughter were aboard. And none of the missing 10 ever resurfaced. If this was an escape arranged by an underground society, it required every participant to abandon family, money, identity, and home forever. Possible, but profoundly unlikely. When the Mary Celeste reached Gibraltar, the British Vice Admiralty Court opened a salvage inquiry. The official responsible, Frederick Solly Flood, approached the ship as though she were a crime scene. He believed he saw suspicious marks on the bow. A damaged rail became possible evidence of violence. Stains aboard the ship were examined as possible blood. Even the captain's missing sword fed the theory that the crew had mutinied, murdered Briggs and his family, then fled. But each dramatic clue weakened under scrutiny. The stains were not convincingly identified as blood. The marks on the ship did not prove a collision. The cargo had not been plundered. The crewmen had respectable records. There was no persuasive motive for a massacre, and no bodies. Then attention turned to the alcohol. 9 barrels were later found empty. Perhaps the crew had broken into the cargo, become intoxicated, and attacked the captain. But the barrels were made from red oak, which was more porous than the white oak used for most of the shipment. Leakage was a simpler explanation. More importantly, the cargo was industrial alcohol, toxic and foul-tasting, not barrels of tavern rum waiting for a drunken mutiny. The inquiry produced suspicion, insinuation, and damaged reputations, but no solution. And that failure created a vacuum. Into it came sea monsters, pirates, giant squid, supernatural forces, and elaborate tales of Atlantic brotherhoods erasing witnesses. Later writers added invented details so effectively that fiction fused with memory. But before you decide what happened, you need to understand something even stranger. The most important clue may not have been what the boarding party found. It may have been what Captain Briggs believed he was about to hear. Picture the Mary Celeste days before she was found. Below deck sit more than 1,700 barrels of alcohol. Some are leaking. Vapor gathers inside the hold. The ship rolls through rough seas. Hatches rattle. Timbers bend. Pumps strain. Now imagine a sudden pressure event. Not necessarily a fireball. Not necessarily flames. Alcohol vapor can create a violent pressure wave, a muffled explosion or booming whoosh capable of blowing open hatches without scorching the ship. Experiments conducted much later showed how an alcohol vapor ignition could frighten a crew while leaving surprisingly little burn damage. But ignition is not required for the strongest explanation. Captain Briggs had reasons to fear the vessel was taking on dangerous water. The ship's chronometer may have been inaccurate, confusing its position. One pump appears to have been disassembled or rendered unreliable. The Mary Celeste had recently carried coal, and debris may have interfered with measuring water in the hold. The sounding rod could tell Briggs that water was rising, without telling him whether the ship was close to sinking. Meanwhile, the vessel was approaching the Azores. Land was near, but bad navigation could make it seem dangerously uncertain. Then comes the clue people often overlook: a rope was found trailing from the ship. You can reconstruct a chilling possibility. Briggs orders everyone into the yawl as a temporary precaution. They do not abandon the Mary Celeste in the ordinary sense. They remain attached to her by a line, planning to wait until the danger passes. The family enters first. Then the crew. 10 people descend into a small open boat while their larger ship continues under reduced sail. For a few minutes, the plan works. Then the weather changes. A squall hits. The Mary Celeste surges forward. The rope snaps, or slips free. Suddenly the yawl is no longer a refuge. It is a tiny boat carrying 10 people in open Atlantic water. Ahead of them, the Mary Celeste catches the wind and begins pulling away. You can almost see the crew rowing after her. Briggs shouting commands. Sarah holding their daughter. The abandoned ship remaining visible just long enough to create hope, then shrinking into rain. This is the main reveal: the Mary Celeste's crew probably did not vanish because they encountered something aboard. They vanished because they left a survivable ship for what they believed was a safer position, and lost the ability to return. That explains the missing boat. It explains the absence of bodies. It explains why valuables and supplies remained. It explains why there were no signs of a sustained struggle. And it explains how the vessel could keep sailing after its crew was gone. The disaster may have required only 3 ingredients: misleading evidence of flooding, fear of an explosion, and one broken line. No monster. No massacre. No perfectly executed Victorian plot. Just a rational decision made with incomplete information, followed by a small mechanical failure in a very large ocean. Yet the underground society theory tells you something important, not about what happened aboard, but about what happened afterward. Victorian investigators lived in a world of insurance schemes, salvage fraud, private clubs, and concealed loyalties. They searched for criminal design because criminal design was familiar. A random chain of errors felt less satisfying than an enemy. And once the public heard there might be a secret behind the ship, the truth could never compete. The Mary Celeste became truly immortal 12 years later, when a young Arthur Conan Doyle published a fictional story inspired by the case. He changed names, altered dates, invented details. His abandoned ship was called the Mary Celeste, and the narrative supplied sinister circumstances missing from the historical record. Readers blurred the fiction with the real mystery. Over time, invented meals were described as still warm. Cups of tea were said to be untouched. The ship was supposedly in perfect condition, as if the crew had disappeared between one heartbeat and the next. None of that accurately reflects what the boarding party documented. The real vessel was wet, damaged, and difficult to control. Its fore and lazarette hatches were open. Its clock and compass were reportedly damaged. Its papers and navigation instruments were missing, likely taken into the yawl. Water stood in the hold. This was not a frozen dinner scene. It was the aftermath of an emergency evacuation. The Victorian Atlantic underworld did exist, secretive lodges, corrupt shipping interests, smugglers, and men who survived by knowing which questions not to ask. But attaching that world to the Mary Celeste turned ordinary uncertainty into deliberate concealment. The conspiracy survived because it offered intention. The likely truth offers something more frightening: nobody had to plan anything. The Mary Celeste continued her career after the mystery. She changed owners, crossed more oceans, and finally met an end almost too fitting for her reputation. In 1885, her captain deliberately wrecked her near Haiti as part of an insurance scheme. This time, there really was a conspiracy aboard the Mary Celeste. It simply came 13 years too late. The fraud failed. The ship decayed on a reef. Briggs, his family, and the 7 sailors were never found. So when you picture the Mary Celeste, do not picture a supernatural ship waiting in absolute silence. Picture a vessel moving steadily into the distance. Behind it, a small boat rises and falls between dark waves. The people aboard believe they can still catch up. They believe the line can be recovered. They believe the emergency is temporary. Then the horizon closes. And the ship sails on without them. If this broke your brain a little, subscribe. We drop one of these every week. Because the next mystery is even darker: a woman found dead in a frozen valley, carrying coded notes and false identities, with every mark that could identify her deliberately cut away. Next, the Istal woman died with every label removed.